Devil's Advocates may not agree on much, but funny is funny. The Devil's Advocates on the Mike 92.1 and the Mike921.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are joined now by very special guest, Congressman Ron Kind. Ron, we were at the WMC event today where Walker made his proposal. I understand you've already responded sort of preemptively to his proposal, but we weren't there to hear. What do you think about Scott Walker turning down this Medicaid money, Congressman Kind?
Well, I think it's disappointing. I think it's the wrong decision. I'm afraid this is putting politics before people in Wisconsin. And a few weeks back, I had communicated to the governor, just follow the lead of some prominent Republican governors around the country who are agreeing to this deal, from Jan Brewer to Governor Kasich in Ohio and many others, because it's not going to get any better. I mean, this would cover an additional 175,000 uninsured citizens in Wisconsin. Right now, our hospital providers have to deal with over $1 billion in uncompensated care due to the uninsured. And when people aren't covered, they still get treatment, but they get sicker. And the treatment they receive is more expensive, and they typically use more expensive procedures like emergency room visits in order to deal with it. And those costs are either swallowed by the hospitals or passed on to people with insurance or to businesses with rising premium and rising costs. So 100% cost share by the federal government for the first 3 years, and then the worst it will get is a 90% cost share by the federal government, all of which is completely paid for already. Rejecting that deal, I think, is foolhardy.
Congressman Kind, this seemed like it was supposed to be a yes or no answer, and somehow Scott Walker has answered maybe. Have you seen any of the details of his proposal? You know, how does he split the difference on this? It seems to me like he's offering subsidization of federal exchanges, but I'm not clear how this is going to reduce the number of people to the tune of 224,000, reduce the number of uninsured in Wisconsin. I don't see how the math adds up in Scott Walker's proposal.
Yeah, neither do I. I'm really perplexed by what type of figures that they're throwing out right now, because having those at about 100% poverty level going into the exchanges were never meant to address that population. That population would be in Badger care. We can also have better coordination of care. We've got models of program there that coordinate and integrate the care for those people, many of them with chronic illnesses that need special attention so they don't slip through the cracks and drive up healthcare costs even more. So I think in the days that come, the numbers that the governor is throwing out there just aren't going to hold up, and it's going to show that he's making the problem much more expensive and much more problematic than it needed to be. We've got a very successful Badger Care program. It, too, is in need of reform and improvement so we get better value for the dollars that are being spent there. There's no question about that. But what he's coming up with, I don't think, A, it's going to work, B, it's not going to cover the number of people that we could under the deal that's being offered, and it's going to be more expensive for Wisconsin taxpayers at the end of the day. I mean, what was being offered at the federal level to the states, this would have saved $64 million in the first year alone for the state of Wisconsin, while also creating 10,500 jobs based on a recent economic analysis of this at a time when we need good-paying jobs being created in Wisconsin today.
You're listening to the Devil's Advocates on the Mike 92.1. We are joined by special guest Ron Kind. Ron, I got to ask you, Walker made a point in his speech that he put in $1.2 billion into Medicaid. Now he's going to add another $644 million, of which $200 million is because the federal government did not live up to their original obligations to provide the money they said they would for Medicaid. What is your response to that?
Well, I think it's just patently false. There's a 60-40 cost share right now. If the states establish the Medicaid coverage and the amount of subsidy, and the federal government automatically picks up 60% of that. No questions. That's just the way it is. And here we are offering a deal to Wisconsin and other states that we're going to go above 60%. We're going to pay 100% of the additional coverage costs for the first 3 years. And then over the next 8 years, that will go down to just 90%, which is much better than the 60% that's being offered today. So the governor rejecting that 100% coverage and then 90% sets us back to a 60-40 cost share, which means it's going to cost the taxpayers of Wisconsin a lot more money to do what he's asking for. And what I don't understand is that all of this is paid for through tough decisions that were made under the Affordable Care Act, through spending reforms and some additional revenue, so it doesn't add a nickel to the federal deficit. And if Governor Walker is concerned that somehow Congress is going to pull the rug out from under the states, he needs to address that to his own party, because Paul Ryan is about to offer another budget this spring that would cut Medicaid funding by 60%, block grant it back to the states, and say, here you go, guys, good luck with it now, even though we're going to reduce the federal cost share by over 60%, which would set the states up for failure, I'm convinced.
You know, I criticized Crudy earlier, and I said, you know, the GAO has come out and says these plans, our economic course is not sustainable. The CBO says the same thing. The Social Security Administration says the same thing. So if, number one, do you agree with that? And number two, if so, why would you want to attach your wagon to that horse?
Well, first of all, what we've had now over the last 4 years is basic level spending with healthcare costs. There's something going on out there that all the economists are finding very interesting, is that healthcare in the federal programs, for Medicare especially, have been relatively constant over the last 4 years. It's been the lowest rate of growth in healthcare spending in over 50 years. So, and you can't attribute that to the economic downfall, because those in Medicare are immune from economic fluctuations, because Medicare is a government-run program. And so their utilization isn't going to change whether the economy is strong or not, unlike families with a limited budget. So I think there are reforms that are starting to take hold as far as how healthcare is delivered and how we're paying for it. That's increasing the efficiency of care that's being delivered and reducing costs at the same time. I'm not saying we're out of the woods yet. We have a lot more work on reform and payment reform especially, so we're rewarding value instead of the volume of care that's given. But there's encouraging news out there right now, which is surprising, the budget experts, the analysis that's being done, and we need to stay focused on this because it is the major cost driver with budgets in Washington, in Madison, and locally, and for businesses and families alike, rising health care costs. And I'm all for increased flexibility and experimentation at the state level. But boy, when you got governors like Kasich and Brewer and others who are very conservative and also have been very critical of the Affordable Care Act, saying, you know, this is a good deal and we would be foolish to reject it, and then Governor Walker does exactly that, you got to really wonder what their analysis is.
You're listening to the Devil's Advocates radio show on the Mike 92.1. We're here with Congressman Ron Kind. Ron, you were at the State of the Union address last night. What was your impression of Mr. Obama?
Well, I thought, you know, he was very comfortable up there, but he also feels he's got some work that needs to be finished. And he laid a lot on Congress's plate. And it was an ambitious agenda. It became a litany in that, and I understand that's what State of the Unions are about, a more detailed domestic agenda in particular. But I think the overall message was the right one, is that we need to be smart. We've got a fiscal house that needs to be put in order. We have some tough budget decisions, but there's a smart and a dumb way in doing it. And we've got to find where the inefficiencies and where the real cost savings are that won't jeopardize economic growth and job creation at the same time. And that's why he specifically mentioned changing the payment system in Medicare so it is value or outcome-based and no longer volume-based. And he has every reason to cite that, because just last year, a recent study came out that showed that we spent over $750 billion in the healthcare system last year alone on things that didn't work, that didn't improve patient care. And in many instances, it left patients worse off rather than better off.
Wow.
That's huge. And if we stay focused on why that is happening and make changes, that would go a long ways to reducing our budget deficits at all levels. But there are also some smart investments that we need to be making at the same time in quality educational opportunities, job training, infrastructure build-out, broadband expansion, clean energy technologies, things that can help us remain the most innovative and competitive nation in the world. But I fear that with the zeal just to cut, we're going to be eating the seed corn at the same time. And then it's going to be very hard to reap a bountiful harvest in the future if we're foolish in these budget decisions.
Ron, real quickly, we are out of time, but what is your gut feeling on the sequester? Are we going off that cliff?
Well, I'm not optimistic. We're only down to 2 weeks right now. There's very little conversation taking place, and especially this week. I've done a lot of discussions with some of my Republican colleagues, and they seem resigned and comfortable with the fact that we're just going to go over the cliff with indiscriminate across-the-board cuts, a lot of it coming out of military readiness. And economists are saying if this happens, we're probably going to lose 1 to 1.5% growth in our GDP because of these automatic cuts that will take effect, and the potential of slipping into another recession, which is the worst thing we can do in dealing with our budget deficits. The most important thing of helping us get out of the deficit hole we're in is having a strong, vibrant, growing economy, creating good-paying jobs. This would do just the opposite.
Congressman Ron Kine, thank you very much for joining us here on the
guys.
Devil's
Happy to
Advocate
meet.
Show.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks for staying long. Folks, we are the Devil's Advocates. Got to get to break.
Looking for full or part-time work in an office environment?